Welcome to Hoots Cambridgeshire Libraries podcast. I'm Rosie, a member of the Library Development team, and in this episode we're talking to author Elly Griffiths. Elly's well known for her Ruth Galloway series set in Norfolk, her Brighton Mysteries, Stranger Diaries and Postscript Murders. What you may not know is that Elly has just published her third school story about Justice Jones. Hi Elly, and thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us today. You well?
Yes, I'm fine, Rosie. It's really lovely to talk to you. I only wish it could be in real life, but it's still lovely to talk to you on Zoom.
Well, one day, who knows what will happen. Just to sort of introduce you, as if people don't know who you are, but obviously I think people will know you best for your Ruth Galloway books, obviously. And a lot more people will know you because of the Stevens and Mephisto, or as they're called, maybe the Brighton Mysteries or the Magic Men. They've got a lot of names, those guys. And then obviously people will have got in touch with your work with Stranger Diaries and with the Postscript Murders. But then we have Justice Jones. And I really, really want us to talk about Justice Jones because I think it might be a new direction for a lot of people who are really used to your work. And I know we've got an interest in this sort of thing. So really, just to start out, can you just tell us where this idea came from?
Oh, it's so lovely to be able to talk about justice, yes. As you say, I'm kind of probably better known for the Ruth Galloway mysteries and other books. But one day I was on a train, and as I used to be quite a lot in the old days of sort of touring around the country, still remember our lovely tour of Cambridgeshire Libraries. With William Shaw and the fun we all had. Anyhow, so I was on a train. I think it might have been between, I seem to remember sort of flat countryside. So I think it was between maybe Norwich and Lowestoft, somewhere like that. Anyhow, I looked out the window and I suddenly thought of the name Justice. And I thought, wouldn't that be a good name? And what sort of person would have the name Justice? And I thought, well, maybe somebody whose father or mother was a lawyer. And then I suddenly thought of a girl, aged 12, called Justice Jones, whose father was a lawyer and whose mother might have been a crime writer. And I thought, oh, she's 12. You know how that sort of thing comes to you. Maybe this is a children's story. So I started to write it down, and it's about a girl called Justice. First one's called A Girl Called Justice, who goes away to boarding school for the first time in 1936. And you know how you're not ever quite sure what you're writing. And I'd almost gone halfway through the book before I thought, oh, my mum went to boarding school for the first time in 1936. She was, like Justice, a single parent. She was brought up by her dad, who was an actor, in fact. And I thought, wow, Justice is my mum. And she's not exactly, but really her experiences are a bit like my mum's. Like my mum, Justice, had never been away to school before. She's sent to school at age 12 when her mother dies. And the first scene in the first book, A Girl Called Justice, is her driving to this school. It's in a taxi, and this terrible sort of looming Gothic tower appears. And that's the school. And she says to the taxi driver, oh, do you come to the school often? And he said, no, but don't know I'm doing this voice, but let's stick with it. No, but my brother drove out here last week. And she says, oh, is he a taxi driver? No, he's the undertaker. So there's been a murder at the school. So that was the start of Justice Jones.
Oh, do you know, I've read it, but I want to read it again now.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, you were talking about this when you came to Cambridgeshire, and I don't think I had a copy then, and I got one and devoured it because I will read anything that is a school story. Colleagues within Cambridgeshire know you can start me off and I will continue to go for ages. And I just absolutely adored it. As an aficionado of the genre, I loved it because you can read it on a level where you're picking out, oh, Mallory Towers. Oh, Shalley School. Ooh.
Yes, there are turrets, yes.
Yes, turrets, North Tower, South Tower, all that sort of, oh, evil matron. And it was, you know, it was a real joy to read on that level. But just as a story on its own, it really, really, I just sailed away with it, thoroughly enjoyed it. And then obviously when book 2 came out, straight on the list for that one, and absolutely, it was even better, actually, Elly. And I was just refreshing on the plot. I mean, the old guy and the new matron and, everything. I mean, really pacey and really racy. So, I mean, I would assume you've had an awful lot of good feedback about them so far.
Oh, it's so lovely to hear you say that, because I know that you are an aficionado of school stories and a big fan, as I am, of Chalet School and Enid Blyton and that whole genre of stories. So it really means a lot that you like the books. And I do think, obviously, they're kind of for 9 to 12-year-olds. Middle grade is what they call that age group now, just changed since we were both in children's publishing, I think. But do you know, I think they are actually for anyone who just enjoys a good murder in a sort of closed world, like a boarding school, which is an absolute, godsend for a crime writer, especially a sort of boarding school in the middle of a marsh like Justice's School. I do like a marsh. Obviously they come into the Ruth books a bit, so I do actually think that they do appeal to anyone who likes a good murder. So I have had quite really lovely feedback. I mean, it's been lovely going to schools again when such things were allowed. It's given me a whole new lease of life, because as a publisher, and we both worked in children's publishing, we often went into schools. It was lovely to do that again, and lovely and quite scary to face a sort of audience of children. So that was amazing. And only yesterday there was a lovely school that had a competition for their favourite book, and they came up with A Girl Called Justice, and those sort of things are so lovely. But also I have had really nice feedback from kind of my adult fans, fans, that sounds terrible, adult readers, who have really, really enjoyed the books, and it's just like Justice is kind of like a young Ruth in a way.
Absolutely. And you sort of touched on the books you've read. And so what would you say growing up, which sort of school stories had really stuck with you and sort of given you a framework?
Well, I was a fan of Mallory Towers. And as you say, Justice's School has both towers and turrets. So, obviously there's a bit of Mallory Towers-ism going on there. Also, like older books, sort of before my time in a way. So Chalet School, I really liked. And also those Angela Bazille books, mainly about the Fourth by Nancy Briley. But also I was a huge fan, I don't know if we've ever talked about this, of Jennings and Derbyshire. And I absolutely love those stories about two boys about a prep school. I don't think I even knew what a prep school was, but they're amazingly written books by Anthony Buckridge, who was a really fantastic person, actually. And interestingly, his great-granddaughter Michelle Buckridge is a crime writer, also very good. And so these books are fantastic. And there's a scene in them that I never forget where Jennings and Derbyshire decide to write a crime novel. And they decide to write a crime novel together, and they think of the name for their detective, and they decide that all detectives have names that have a 2-syllable first name and a single-syllable second name. So they come up with Flixton Slick Super Sleuth. And I always think about that when I'm thinking of character names, Flixton Slick Super Sleuth. And funnily enough, when my publishers for the Justice books, the first cover, I think, says on it Super Sleuth. So I thought, I've made it. I've got my own Super Sleuth. So yeah, Jennings and Derbyshire, I've reread them as an adult. Like you, I love rereading children's books, and they are just as funny. They are laugh out loud funny.
I'd never thought of reading the Jennings and Derbyshire. I did get close to them, but never thought to read them. But what you've reminded me of, P.G. Wodehouse, Mike at Rickin and Mike and Smith with the silent P.
Oh, yes, Smith, yes.
They were boarding school stories as well. And I just adored that world. I mean, I just love his world anyway, Jeeves Buster, the whole thing. But so many people have sort of, it was a huge, huge business, the sort of first half of the last century, school stories. They must have sold them by the shelf. Everybody, the Dimsey books. Have you ever read any of the
No, I don't think I have.
Oh, Dimsey and her anti-soppist league were against all things soppy. And it was the Jane Willard Foundation. It was quite a strange school. But I've got all of those tucked away in a cupboard somewhere upstairs as well. But yeah, really interesting. All of them taking children out away from the home environment where they ran their own societies. And, you had the nasty ones, the sneaky ones, the ones that were good at sport, or the timid ones. For me, and I don't know whether you've read any of her work, Antonia Forrest is an absolute pillar of the genre. Her Marlowe family stories, some are set at a girls' boarding school, some are at home in the holidays, and she just, whenever she wrote one, she set it in the time she was writing. So the early ones were the 1940s, just after the war. And then they get to the swinging 60s and hipster clothes and a change of money, but always believable, always, because she was writing about the time she was in, but the characters and, you know, the way she sort of takes apart the baddie in the first few books, this sixth former called Lois, is it Sanger or Sangster? Can't remember now. And she is a manipulative and vicious older girl who just doesn't like the young twins because she's a rival with their older sister who's going to be games captain. And she does everything she can to get these 12-year-old twins into trouble. And this war carries on for years through school year and school year. And some of the themes she covers are amazing. So if you haven't read any of Antonia Forrest, I can really recommend it.
I've read some, but a long time ago, and you have maybe want to go back to them. And it's reminding me as well that they didn't really shy away from some quite dark things, did they? I mean, even if you think about Mallory Towers, the girl who goes swimming and ends up sort of dashed against the rocks, and her athletic career is kind of ruined. And there's some bits are quite dark, aren't they, really? And I always think as well that Enid Blyton was a crime writer, really. And if you think about the famous Five and the Secret Seven, there is a crime there, isn't there? It's not usually murder, it's theft from a post office van or something. But I do remember, I don't know if you've read the Willoughby Fair mysteries, and that it's a really good one. It's I think there are only a few books about this set of children, and there's a very good crime novel there. And there's a scene where they go to the house at night. Someone always has to do that. Justice is always doing that in my books. And there are all these stuffed toys there in the grounds, and their glass eyes glittering. And it's a very scary scene, and it's a very clever clue. So yes, I think there's maybe hidden crime novels in a lot of those school books. Maybe, do you think?
I think you're right. I mean, the first book I ever owned was The Mystery of the Disappearing Cat, Enid Blyton.
And that's a mystery. It's all there in the title. Excellent title.
Yes, the policeman, Theophilus Goon.
Oh, yes. The police don't get a good rap, really, in Enid Blyton's books, do they? Yes.
No, I mean, looking back, the inspectors were always jolly nice and thought the children were marvellous, but the police officers were always very common and working class. So
there is that snobbery there, isn't
yes.
there? That you can even see in sort of Victorian literature and sort of Sergeant Cuff in the Moonstone, how he's treated by the family and how he's neither quite below stairs or one of the aristocrats. So that yes, there definitely is that, and the sort of idea that an amateur would always do better than the sort of bumbling police officer is there. Definitely, it was there in real life and is there in the literature.
And he was written quite viciously, if you think about it. Yeah, as you say, she didn't pull any punches. If it was very obvious who you were to like and who you were not to like. But yeah, I mean, it's really, really interesting. Sort of going on from that, did you see the TV adaptation of Mallory Towers?
Yeah, I thought it was really good, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I mean, they smooshed a lot of books into the one series, and then they invented a bit. And the purists would say, well, that didn't happen. But yeah, it was really well done. And I thought the look of it was beautiful.
Yes, yes. Why do you think? Because it does seem to be a bit of an interest game, because as you were saying, there was definitely a golden age in school stories as there was in crime writing. But now I think, you know, people like Sir Robin Stevens and Shana Jackson, people like that writing now. But why do you think there's a new interest in school stories
I don't know. Do you think it's about taking, as you said, taking the children away from an adult sphere? I mean, yes, there are still adults there, but they're at a distance. And it's always been about children being in charge of their own world and having to sort their own problems out. And, you know, just making their own way, finding their own place and how they get along with people that they don't get on with. They may be bullied. There may be people that are just not nice to them. You can't there's so many messages in there. I really don't know. I mean, it would be lovely to know, or whether, now this is a thought, going back to the early days, the 20s, when Angela Brazil and Eleanor Brent Dyer were writing, you know, women didn't really have much of a place in the world. Maybe, we'd just come out of the First World War, women had worked in factories, but it was quite empowering for them, had schools run by women, and that schools that moved across the continent and just started up and built a clientele.
Yes.
And, women dealing with all sorts of adventures. And maybe there was an element of that to it then. Time's gone by, we can't ask them.
That's such an interesting point, Rosie, and it's true, isn't it? Because these worlds are sort of, if we're talking about girls' school stories, they're run by these very powerful women who do, as you said, like in the chalet school stories, just go up a mountain and set up a school. And I do remember somebody saying to me, another writer actually, Karen Slaughter, saying to me that in her childhood growing up in America, she loved libraries because they were full of powerful women. Because it's often women working in libraries and they're very powerful, and that's their realm, as you know, as a librarian yourself. So I wonder if that's true as well. That there are these powerful women and really good role models. Really,
I think there could be something in it. I did, and it's the same theme, but not a school story. I read a proof of a book called Cecily the other week, and it is Cecily Neville, the mother of King Edward IV, Richard III. And in her notes at the back, the author, whose name was in my mind, has just eluded me, senior moment, but she said that these women, these heads of these noble families in Middle Ages, really, they ran their family, they ran multiple households. By and large, they ran the local village attached to their household. Their husbands would have a retinue, they'd have an army, and they'd be having babies practically every year, and they'd be responsible for the budget, the feeding of these people. She said, in common day parlance, these women had it all, and they now, in these days, would be the equivalent of a CEO of a FTSE company.
That's so true, as you think of people like Bess of Hardwick and and Elizabeth Woodville and these powerful. Also, I was thinking of nuns. They weren't doing the having the children bit, but I think even in those times, being a nun could be a chance to be a very powerful person. If you were the mother of a convent. Well, I mean, you were very powerful, weren't you? And I think there have been, I think, some nun detectives. I'm trying to think of some, but think of Antonia Fraser's Quiet as a Nun is a very good crime novel set in a convent. But yes, those women were very powerful too. And again, it's something about the closed world, isn't it? And I think maybe that's why there's some really good sort of children's crime at the moment, because I've set mine in the 30s, partly because I think of this link with my mum, and I was thinking of Robin Stevens' books also set in the 30s. But have you read Shana Jackson's High Rise Mysteries? Because they're amazing crime novels that are set in very much in a kind of brutalist tower block in the middle of London, and two black sisters, and black women are very underrepresented in crime fiction generally, particularly in children's crime, and Nick and Norva, and they're just amazing characters. I think you'd really like those books.
I think I probably would, and I shall be digging them out. You see, it's always good to get recommendations. One of the ones that always stuck with me, and I can still see the cover. It was the first book I ever borrowed from a library when I was about 7, and it was Charlotte Sometimes, Penelope Farmer.
That's a great book.
Yes,
great time shift book, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, girl, boarding school. She goes to bed mid-Second World War in a boarding school. She wakes up at the same bed in the same school in the First World War.
Oh gosh, I'm wanting to reread that. As a matter of fact, I'm writing Justice 3 is out now, The Ghost in the Garden, and I'm writing book 4 now, and that's Second World War. She's got to the Second World War, so I must reread that. How fascinating. Yes, it was such I remember really. So what's the other time shift book, the set where she goes back to Tudor times? Alison Utley. Is it Alison Utley? We'll remember in a bit.
We will. It'll come to us, but people might scurry off and do some research.
Yes.
Let's leave it out there as a teaser.
And help us out. Yeah.
I know the one I can picture the cover.
Yeah, I can.
They were very sketchy. They used to have an oval with a pastel outline and a sketch. Yes, I can picture it, but sadly, that's not going to come to me today. I don't think.
Something in Time. No, I'll stop guessing.
Yeah, Child in Time.
Child in Time.
Yeah, we're going to drive ourselves mad. Let's
Yeah, we will.
let's not. Let's not drive everybody else mad as well. And then going back to nuns, and I think you're right about the closed societies. There is a book coming out, and it's a girls' school story, and it features nuns and ducks and cake.
You've sold me already. You know, that's amazing.
Yep, and it's Daisy May Johnson, whose Twitter handle is @chaletfan, so you know she's with us.
Oh, yes, exactly. She's one of us.
I read a galley proof of it, and it's called How to Be Brave, and it's about a girl. She has to go to a boarding school because of her family circumstances. There's a big mystery going on, but the nuns are called good sisters. And they're really not really religious nuns at all. And it's just such a take. And what I absolutely loved, drove me mad on an iPad where I was reading the galley proof. She does the footnotes at the bottom of the page with the little number in the text. And that is just pure Brent Dyer, isn't it?
It really is.
And it, as an aficionado, you read it, and again, you're spotting little bits, but it actually works as a reading list of classic children's reads.
How to Be Brave. I must read that.
Brave. Daisy May Johnson. And from what I gather on Twitter, her life's ambition is for someone to turn Brent Dyer's Chalet School in Exile into a film.
Oh.
That's all she wants in life.
But that would be amazing. Has nobody ever done it? Has nobody ever televised them?
Nope.
Because, of course, we know that Val McDermott's also a big Chalet School fan, isn't she?
She is. Didn't she go on Mastermind?
I think, yes. I mean, she won, didn't she? She won Mastermind. She's an amazing quizzer. I mean, she's a brilliant woman. Yeah, I think Eleanor Brent, the Chalet School books were her specialist subject.
Could be wrong, but I think it's right.
I think you might be right. Yeah. So again, there's that link, isn't there, between crime novels and there's school stories. You know, there's something in it. There's something in there that's a real link somewhere.
There's a study waiting to be done there, isn't there?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Now,
definitely.
If only I'd known that, if only I'd read crime novels. I didn't start reading crime until I was pregnant with my first child. I don't know what that says about him or me. But I did my university dissertation on the rise and fall of the girls' school story. Now, wouldn't it have been better if it was drawing parallels and comparisons?
But still, that sounds fascinating. You know, I wrote my dissertation on crowded rooms in Victorian fiction, because there are very many crowded rooms in Victorian literature. And I said, and this was, you know, obviously years and years ago, way before I'd written a crime novel, that because rooms were so crowded in Victorian times, the crime novel had to appear, because the first crime novels appeared in the 19th century, to sort of find our way through the muddle that was inside the houses. So you had to have detectives, and you had to have clues, and you had to have this sort of domestic life, you know, and a clues to find your way through it. So it's funny how both of us were already interested in those subjects then, really.
We can't be alone, can we? We can't
No.
be the only two people. There must be people who don't think we're unusual, I think.
No. And you know, people who love reading have always loved reading, always, haven't they? And read all sorts of things. So yeah, definitely. I'm sure we're not alone.
Absolutely. And what I do like, sort of harking back to justice, I like the fact that, as in all your other work, you're building an ensemble cast. I like that, and I like the world, and it's a world you can see. I think they're very visual. Have you been approached?
Not for these books, no. And I think you know, I'm always in talks with various people about the Ruth books maybe going on TV, and that's always kind of ongoing things. I wonder if, you know, children that age solving murders is still a bit difficult to do on television. I don't know, but thank you for that though, because it's what I love doing, is creating a sort of world. And of course you've got Justice, and now you've got her friend Stella and her friend Dorothy, who's a maid at the school, and all the other people there, and all the group of barn owls, the people who share the dormitory. And I really do like that. I really do like that world. Of course, then you can do what I did in book 3, which is you can have a newcomer, and they are, you know, there's instantly throws everything off kilter, and everyone has to recalibrate and readjust to this newcomer, especially Letitia, who is in book 3, who doesn't really stick to the rules, even less than Justice does. So that is really good fun. I must admit, I really love writing these books, partly I think because I just love, literature for that age group, and I love writing about schools, and because possibly because Justice reminds me of my mum, who did, funnily enough, my mum wrote stories herself, like little spy novels, because she was living through the war, of course. And my mum's name was Sheila Nan Laws, and she wrote about a character called Nan Laws. And the person who did the wonderful illustrations of Justice on the books is called Nan Lawson. Isn't that nice?
Spooky.
It is quite spooky, isn't it?
Quite spooky, yes. I mean, but we know there are chances, there are coincidences. You come across them every day, but they always make you stop and think, what's the chance of that happening?
Well, what about us meeting again?
Absolutely. I mean, that was just a chance conversation at a publisher's day, wasn't it? And you decided there was space at our table and we didn't look too unfriendly. You said, could I sit here? And by way of the blessed Val McDermott, we worked out we both worked for the same publisher.
Yeah, so we'd both worked for HarperCollins children's books. We both loved the Shelley School. We both worked on them. And yeah, that was so funny. So we do have that history that goes back to both used to work in publishing and both worked on the Shelley School books. And we were talking about that really famous moment where the Shelley School books had to be up. We did a new edition, didn't we? And going back through the old editions to see if anything needed sort of modernising. And one of the things was that there's a scene where they're always getting lost, aren't they? They get lost in the mountains, and Jo is there with the 3 triplets, and the mother and her children are lost in the mountains, and to cheer them up, she gives them all a cigarette.
That was the first thing you said to me. That's how we got into our conversation. Yes, yeah, there are some quite interesting things. There's a lot of chat at the moment about the abundance of eligible young doctors in the Shelley School series. Everybody manages to marry a doctor.
Yes.
And of course, the school is always in tandem with the sanatorium. And I mean, even I didn't know what a sanatorium was. So, they started out in the 1920s when an awful lot of people had TB and had to go to the mountains.
And be outside, yes, in the mountains. Yeah. It's a bit like at the end of Mallory Towers. Don't all the girls go to St Andrews University for some strange reason?
Study creative writing and be authors, or things like that.
They're at a Cornish boarding school, and they literally go to the other end of the country to go to university. And Daryl Rivers, who is the heroine of the, wasn't that the name of Enid Blyton's boyfriend? I think
her husband was.
Her husband, yeah. So it's kind of weird. Oh, who are we to judge? Maybe not weird, but it is interesting that she named her schoolgirl heroine after her husband.
There's another study waiting to be done.
I think so, definitely.
Don't you think people were more resilient to travel in those days? And a large part of a lot of boarding school stories is the train journey. Getting on a train and going fast. Nobody ever went locally to school, did they?
That's so true. And you get that in Harry Potter too, don't you?
Absolutely. Yes.
She did embrace in those books a lot of those traditions, didn't she? The journey to school, the train, the tuck box, the talk about food, that's all there, isn't it, really? The new teacher who appears at every beginning of every term, that's all there in those books.
It is, and what I think she's done, J.K. Rowling, is she's introduced the whole genre.
Yes, you're probably right.
Because, they came out late 90s when my 2 were quite small. And, how many kids late 90s would think, I'm going to read a boarding school story? And I think she's just opened the whole thing up to, they're not, some of them are a time capsule, some of them are timeless. But yes, very, very interesting. And it's just got such a lure, the whole, if it's your thing, if you don't like school stories, this chat is going to be torture, isn't it? And this was the day Cambridgeshire Libraries tortured Elly Griffiths readers.
But, just give them a go. But I think you're really right about that. You think back to the days when we were in children's publishing, until Harry Potter came along, and he did come along in our time, and HarperCollins didn't publish them. But we wouldn't have guessed that the next big thing would be school stories, would we? That wasn't where we were at that point, I don't think.
We weren't, but we did acquire all of the rights from Chambers, didn't we, to do the new paperbacks
Yes, yes.
well, I was there 80s, 90s. I mean, there'd been the old Armada editions around for years, but we did all the new editions and compilations.
Yes, I suppose that's true.
So they must have bought them in for a reason. And I mean, I was the standing expert, which, you know, they say, all right, any targets, give them to her. She's the rep, she'll sell them. And, you know, if anybody wanted to know anything about the Shalley School, they used to consult me. It was very flattering.
Well, you know, it's as we know now, a subject that could have won you Mastermind.
Yeah, do you know, I doubt it, Ellie. I think my time has gone on that one. And anyway, Val McDermott beat me to it. But yeah, it's an engrossing genre which can be just thrown away as fluff. And when you start looking into a lot of the themes and the background and the undertow, it's a lot deeper than people think. There's a lot, all human life is there, really, isn't it? I don't know how successful. I think there was a little rash of stories. I used to collect a group of stories about a boarding school in Cornwall again, called Trebizond by Anne Digby, and I adored those books. They were quite modern, and Rebecca was going to be a tennis star, and as they got older, they had boyfriends, and I absolutely adored them, but it's really hard to find a trace of them now.
Trebizond rings a real bell.
Yes. And it's
Yes.
Rebecca Mason. She was on the LTA's development program for tennis.
Oh, how interesting.
Yes. And one of her friends was called Tish, which was quite funny. But yeah, it's interesting. But it seems like not all of the ones from the early days have stood the test of time, but quite a few of them have.
Yes, and I think they do still have that sort of pull. I loved Nancy Brierley, mainly about the Fourth, but haven't been able to find any more of her books. But yes, they're so funny, and there's real wit as well. And I think people also I think I was always drawn to the relationships and to the little group, the little gang. And you know, as we were saying earlier, a lot of these writers didn't shy away from the fact that there were nastinesses in those little gangs as well. But you know, that there's that, and there's sort of the midnight feast, and there's being a little group, you know. And the book that I'm writing at the moment, which is Justice 4, of course, that they're isolated in their school, and there's a war on. And not to give spoiler alert, but what's happened to Justice School is what happened to my mum's school, in that a boys' school was evacuated to the same site. So that's quite exciting, isn't it?
Shocking, really shocking.
I know.
And then probably the last thing I really want to sort of run past you. I mean, you're embedded with your fellow crime writers, and it's a really supportive group. I can see that from all of the work you do with other crime writers. What's their reaction been to Justice?
Oh, that's a really nice question. Yeah, it's such a funny thing, isn't it? Because crime writers, I always say to myself, are really nice, and we are really supportive of each other. Usually, it's quite collegiate, you know, and established writers like Val McDermott and Peter James were very good to me when I was starting out, and you know, really nothing in it for them to support the new writer, but they all did. And yeah, I have lots of crime writery friends, particularly good friends with Leslie Thompson and William Shaw, who live nearby, and we're a little crime trio. It's been really interesting seeing their reactions, and I sent the first Justice book to Leslie, and she loved it, and she said, oh, I feel like I'm 13 again. And so she really sort of embraced it. And a lot of my sort of crime writing friends who write quite much darker stuff than I do, really, because although my novels, I wouldn't say they're cozy, and that there is crime and there are dark things in them, as you know, I don't go in for sort of too much violence, and so it's mainly sort of suggested. But people who write, you know, some lovely friends of mine who write some very bloodthirsty things, have really liked the Justice books. So that's been very nice, actually. People have been very, very good about them. And I was talking to a crime writer friend, and they said to me, Peter's playing the Bark. And I thought, what do you mean? And that's a code from the Justice books. So she'd been reading the Justice books. So yes, and Laura Wilson, who is a really great crime writer, also, big fan of sort of children's literature. She likes them too. So that has been very nice. I have to say, very unexpected to have them embraced by my bloodthirsty fellow writers.
I can concur. I've read everything by Leslie and by William. And William has one book where, as he admits himself, it's a bit too stabby. I didn't sleep for weeks. I had to message him and say, what are you doing to this poor man? Is there going to be anything of him left? And he said, yeah, it was a bit stabby.
They also seem to like the odd school story, so that's nice too.
We should challenge them, really, shouldn't we? We should challenge them to have a go at a school story and see what they come up with.
We so should. In fact, wouldn't it be great to see if, in fact, Leslie did a very good short story about Stella, her main character, when she was young. But wouldn't it be quite fun to see Rebus at school, or Vera at school? We should do that.
Vera would be amazing.
Wouldn't she be amazing?
Yes, she'd be really twisty, wouldn't she?
She would also be the person whose school uniform was never quite right and was always, her hat was on skew with, and she would always be that person, or Karen Perry from Val McDermott's books. That'd be, or William's Alex Cupidie. What would she have been like at school? And then you would have got her parents, who we also know from his previous book. So I feel this is a good idea.
Well, hopefully it's not just us.
Yeah.
It would be good though, wouldn't it? You could do prequels. Well, maybe we've just given half the world a new publishing idea.
Yes.
And maybe they think we've gone too far down the wormhole.
Maybe they do. But, in children's literature, going down a rabbit hole is often a good idea.
Well, there is a precedent for it, isn't there?
Yeah, there really is.
Right, so I think that's got us to a nice logical rounding off spot. So all that remains is to say thank you so much for indulging me, because you have indulged me. There's not many people would basically encourage me with my knowledge, my long tucked away knowledge of school stories.
It's been so much fun, Rosie. It's been brilliant, and you are really an encyclopedia of school stories.
Thank you so much. That has been absolutely wonderful, and thank you for being a supporter of Cambridgeshire Libraries and our new podcast where this is appearing. So you're in a very select
supporting
group.
Me as well.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Elly and I really enjoyed our conversation. We had a few memory lapses, so just in case we left you pondering, the character in Antonia Forrest King's stories is Lois Sounder. Alison Utley's book is A Traveller in Time. Cecily is written by Annie Garthwaite, and Enid Blyton's husband was Darrell Waters, so we weren't too far off. Thank you for listening, and do look out for more episodes. Book Hoots is produced by Cambridgeshire Libraries.